Listen, I'm gonna be upfront with you guys. I love this game, and I'm going to be gushing about it a lot, so you'll have to excuse me if I sound like a rambunctious gay talking about his favorite scenes from the Fast and the Furious. There's also going to be a lot of comparisons to the Souls series for obvious reasons, so if you're concerned that I'll be a big meanie to either game, rest easy knowing that I beat both my wives equally. Nioh is a Souls-inspired, level-based adventure game that's set in feudal Japan during the cusp of their warring period. You play as William Adams, an Englishman who arrives on Japanese shores to track down an occult sorcerer, Edward Kelly, to take back his waifu in a jar. The two Brits find themselves siding with the opposing warring armies, aiding and hunting down each other and slaying a shit ton of demons while doing so. It's an epic rivalry that lasts all the way up to the bloodiest battle in Japanese history, the Battle of Sekigahara. And if you were looking for historical accuracy, I think it might be located somewhere on one of the moons of Jupiter. So yeah, the game takes a few historical liberties to tell a cohesive story in a video game, but then again, what game based on history doesn't? All this is done for the simplicity and understanding of what the game is trying to lay out. So the narrative is very simple to follow. It's drop baby in dumpster simple. The main protagonist is an aimless Mary Sue, the villain has a very cliche motivation, and everyone seems to have the compulsion to exposit the plot or vomit exposition. But in spite of all that, the plot manages to have a lot of wit and charm only a Team Ninja game can provide. With how the story is set up, you can't really tell of where exactly it's gonna go. But hell, they won me over with a talking cat with awkward comedic timing. Overall, I find the game's story rather enjoyable, as cliched as the narrative is, constantly having me on the edge of my seat every time I complete a mission. These characters may be archetypes, but there's clearly enough emotional impact behind everything they do and say for me to empathize with them or find them charming in some sort of way, overlooking the fact that the two main leads aren't exactly the most inspired in terms of design. Because both play their parts so well, it immediately becomes a non-issue.
Oh, yes, that's it. Kill each other, you samurai fools!
However, the main objective of the protagonist does get lost halfway through the game, and they really like introducing new characters to the story at the very last minute, as if players are gonna know who these people are. I mean, I do know who these people are, and after all, this game is made specifically for me. But I feel as though in terms of plot development, it's kind of weird. I mean, this is Team Ninja we're talking about, subtle script writing isn't exactly their forte. But hey, at least they're stepping out of their comfort zone of making games with over-the-top violence and sexy characters, and have moved on to something more mature, like over-the-top characters and sexy violence. Hey, you pick your demons. Ha 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 ha! Let me warn you right now, it is a mistake to go into this game expecting a Dark Souls experience but with squintier eyes. And although I'm being hyperbolic in my comparison, it is a fool's errand to think that either of these games are at all similar, even though Nioh is blatantly ripping off concepts that is in Dark Souls, but shut up, I'm trying to make a point. What, all Souls-like games look the same? You fucking racist. The gameplay of Nioh consists of walking around an open environment, exploring the landscape, finding weapons and items, and avoiding being murdered by the locals because of your skin color. Kinda like living in Arizona with absolutely nothing changed. The game has a huge emphasis on combat compared to its Souls counterpart, having 5 weapon classes, each with their own upgrade tree and progression stats, 2 supporting skill types, and a fuck ton of weapons that can be upgraded and dismantled for better upgrades. Fighting enemies gives you experience that you can use to become stronger at certain weapon skills. An extensive use of certain weapon skills allows you to strengthen your abilities with said weapon. Each technique you unlock is an avenue of combat that either adds nothing or is a vital part of your skill path. So it's in your best interest to look within the game to find out which moveset is better attuned to your playstyle and choose accordingly. It's a nice formula of fighting dudes directly affecting your ability to fight more dudes, as where in Dark Souls, fighting dudes helps you unlock the use of weapons, which prompts you to upgrade it so you can get better at fighting dudes. These are two completely different schools of thought made even more clear by Nioh's approach to stamina management. You see, in Dark Souls, you're free to use up all your stamina, with the only consequence of not having any more stamina. Kinda like alcoholism. But in Nioh, if you use up too much of your stamina, you get punished with a knockdown state that leaves you completely defenseless while your stamina refills to a certain threshold. Kinda like alcoholism, but at a bar of stamina. This may seem like a pain in the ass to manage in the heat of combat because it totally is. However, the game balances this out by making all other human enemies adhere to the same logic. And you know what? I kind of like it. Unlike Dark Souls, where all your combat options are tied to how much stamina you're comfortable with losing, Nioh forces you to not be complacent with the extensive use. It's a better gambit to keep an eye on your stamina and manage and upgrade it accordingly, because the smallest lapse in judgment could mean fatality. The enemies in the game are just as disadvantaged as you, susceptible to the same staggering tactics and stamina burn. However, unlike you, human enemies are willing to tire themselves out trying to fight you, and some of the bandits can cycle through a high, low, and medium stance, and can fight more conservatively. And if you're not paying attention, it'll be hard for you to distinguish the difference between a bandit and a bandit wearing a slightly different helmet. So I'd advise scoping them out before actually engaging them. And that's a proper guide to fighting all the human enemies, which is the equivalent of saying, here's how to make cereal for breakfast. The real enemies in the game are the yokai, who are not greatly afflicted by stamina burn, and each having their own pattern. You'll be more often than not fighting them to learn their moves before realizing that some of these bulky bastards are actually complete pushovers. The real stars of these levels are the bosses, who are usually powerful yokai who have preferential advantages and disadvantages against certain weapons and styles of skills. It's not completely vital to fight them with the right assortment of stats in mind. It just makes it slightly longer to beat them if you don't. And if you're really feeling like a big man or woman playing as a big man, you can take a stab at Twilight mode, which replaces all human enemies with yokai, and all yokai have new attacks that you will never see in the vanilla missions. All, if not most, passive enemies become highly aggressive, making it almost impossible to bypass obstacles without triggering someone. It's the Milo Yiannopoulos of game modes. Even bosses get new attacks, which adds an extra layer of awareness, forcing you to rethink certain aspects of the fight. The level design is just as good, and is one of the few things that the game didn't copy from Dark Souls. Each level is broken up via world map, which gives room for each one of them to be unique and distinct. Each one evokes a different aspect of what the overall theme of the level is, which does inevitably tie to the boss. Some of these levels have mini gimmicks to keep traversal fresh and interesting, be it 2 walking planes of elevation, high cliffs with bottomless pits, claustrophobic labyrinths filled with death traps, Josh Scorcher's house, etc. Exploring these areas is fun and rewarding, leading to discoveries of hidden items and the sweet, sobering sight of a dead end so you can stop going mad with options. There is also a copious amounts of what I can only describe as shortcut porn. But what's cool about this is that it gives the player variety in exploration. There's no correct path to take because some of the routes loop back into themselves, allowing you to approach almost all the enemy ambushes backwards, completely breaking the sequencing. It's all dependent on how much challenge you want. Either you follow the path that's laid out before you and be the mercy of a monster attack, or take your chance with a demon fog and fight a high-level yokai to get through a simpler path. Like I said, the game gives you plenty of options. Not quite as good or as detailed as Dark Souls, but it's still very impressive. However, they do start to feel a little samey after a while. Once you've played through the missions in the first chapter, you've basically seen to all of the assets the game has to offer. And they don't vary up the enemies as often as you would like, although certain bosses from the start of the game start to become regular enemies. So that's an interesting detail to have. And I don't know if this is the fault of the game or my incredibly huge balls, but after a certain point, the game stops being challenging. Even with newly introduced enemies, their patterns become completely predictable, and I can see enemy ambushes coming from a mile away. And I rarely died to bosses on my first attempts. Either I have finally obtained the status of Big Dick G, or the developers just get lazy towards the end of the game. And then there's the vomit party that is the item management. In the game, you will pick up weapons, equipment, and items off the enemies you kill or in chests you find. Each of these items have unique stats and damage multipliers that make each one different, which is a perfect excuse for the game to completely waterboard your inventory with them, giving you no method of properly organizing anything, so it doesn't feel like you're walking through an orphanage looking for the one child with a spark in his eye. I wouldn't mind this so much if the game didn't outright trivialize the forging and reforging system by rewarding the player with legendary weapons that have nominally more superior stats, abilities, and upgrades. What is the point of cluttering my workspace with dozens of useless crap if you're just going to give me crap that's actually useful anyway? This design decision is so obscure and weird it might as well have a leading role in Wicker Man. The soundtrack to this game is very good, dare I say excellent, which goes hand in hand with the sound design. It excels at capturing the desolate and oppressive atmosphere of the period. Every footstep, sword/bell chime, man holding a microphone near his throat sound very organic and leaves a nice impression. The ambient music playing in the background gives a nice feeling of the land torn apart by war, ravaged by demonic entities. And the unique boss music is some of the best music I've ever heard in a video game. In short, I think Nioh is an excellent game. It does a perfect job of paying lip service to the series it's obviously inspired by, and at the same time having enough unique features to stand on its own merits, unlike other Souls-inspired games that escape me right now. And it's a good thing too, because I've been waiting for this game to release for almost a decade, way back when it was called Oni. And after years of delays, revisions, and them switching the syllables around, it's finally out for us all to see. And although I make fun of Dark Souls in this review, I do recognize that if it wasn't for the success of the Souls series, this game probably would have never gotten finished and stayed on the shelf to rot like a secondary Toy Story character. And after years of playing the alpha, the beta, the second beta, the closed beta, the PAX demo, and watching every live stream under the sun, I'm confident to say that Nioh is worth the purchase. I would recommend telling your friends about this game, but in my experience in trying to interject this title into conversations, only leaves people with a sudden desire to go back and watch The Matrix.